Welcome to Screen Hollywood, the home of movie news and entertainment. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Almost imperceptibly, the atmosphere begins to change. The mother's expressions become harder to read. Her body language feels wrong. The moment your brain starts asking questions, the horror has already begun. Slowly tightens its grip on you. Every glance, every pause, every strange expression, every awkward silence, looking at your own mother, and wondering whether she actually is your mother. That's psychological horror at its finest. And Jessica Chastain has exactly the kind of screen presence needed to sell it. Every now and then, a trailer comes along that doesn't need to show you monsters. It doesn't need gallons of blood. It doesn't need deafening jump scares. Instead, it gets under your skin with one simple question. What if the person you trusted most wasn't really them? That is exactly what Other Mommy did to me. I watched the trailer expecting another fairly standard supernatural horror film. You know the formula. A haunted house, a creepy child, a few loud noises, roll credits. But within the first minute, I realized this was trying to do something far more unsettling. It starts so innocently. A mother preparing food for her daughter. A completely ordinary domestic scene. Nothing feels unusual. Nothing feels threatening. Then, little by little, something starts to feel wrong. Not because of what you see, but because of what you feel. The mother begins behaving just slightly off. Not enough to immediately alarm you, but enough to make your instincts start screaming that something isn't right. That's brilliant filmmaking, because true horror rarely begins with monsters, it begins with doubt. And by the end of this trailer, I wasn't thinking about ghosts. I wasn't thinking about jump scares. I was thinking, what if your own home became the one place you could no longer trust? That's terrifying. One thing I've noticed over the last few years, the best horror films usually aren't built around complicated concepts. They're built around simple ideas that attack something fundamental. Smile, talk to me, barbarian, weapons. Each one takes a single, unsettling concept and explores it in ways you don't expect. That's exactly what Other Mommy appears to be doing. Because this isn't really a story about a monster. It's a story about trust. Every child believes one thing without question. Their mother is their safe place. The person who protects them, comforts them, makes everything better. Now imagine turning that idea completely upside down. Imagine looking at your own mother and wondering whether she actually is your mother. That's psychological horror at its finest. The monster isn't frightening because of what it looks like. It's frightening because it destroys the safest relationship in a child's life. And honestly, I think that's a far more disturbing premise than another demon jumping out of a wardrobe. One of the first names that caught my attention was Jessica Chastain. I've been a fan of hers for years. She's one of those actors who brings credibility to everything she appears in. Whether it's drama, thrillers, or horror, she commits completely. She never feels like she's simply reading dialogue. She inhabits her characters. That's important for a film like this, because the entire concept depends on the audience believing the relationship between mother and daughter. If that emotional connection doesn't work, neither does the horror. From what little we've seen, it already feels authentic. You believe she's a loving mother, which makes everything that follows infinitely more disturbing, because the trailer slowly begins asking, is this really her? Or is something else wearing her face? That's a horrifying question. And Jessica Chastain has exactly the kind of screen presence needed to sell it. Another reason I immediately became interested, Rob Savage. I genuinely think he's one of the most underrated horror directors working today. He first caught everyone's attention with Host, a film made during lockdown that somehow managed to create genuine tension through computer screens. That alone showed something important. You don't need enormous budgets to frighten audiences. You need imagination. Then he directed The Boogeyman. Again, another film that proved he understands atmosphere. He's not obsessed with throwing monsters at the camera every 30 seconds. He understands pacing, silence, anticipation. That slow feeling of dread that keeps tightening until you can barely breathe. Watching this trailer, I can already see those same fingerprints. He's building tension. He's allowing the audience to notice little details. He's trusting us to feel uncomfortable, rather than telling us when to be scared. That's confidence, and I think this could easily become his biggest film yet. As if Jessica Chastain and Rob Savage weren't enough, then I noticed another name, James Wan. Now, whether he's directing or producing, his involvement instantly catches my attention. Because over the last 2 decades, Wan has helped redefine supernatural horror. From Saw to Insidious to the Conjuring universe, he's repeatedly shown that audiences don't just want gore. They want atmosphere. They want mythology. They want stories that stay with them after they leave the cinema. With Blumhouse and Atomic Monster involved, there's also another reason to feel optimistic. These studios understand horror. Time and time again, they've demonstrated that clever ideas matter more than gigantic budgets. Some of the biggest horror successes of the last decade weren't built on visual effects. They were built on unforgettable concepts. And honestly, Other Mommy has one of the strongest concepts I've heard in a long time. Here's what impressed me most. It never felt desperate. It wasn't trying to overwhelm me. There were no rapid-fire edits, no loud orchestral stings every 5 seconds, no endless montage of screaming. Instead, it trusted the audience. The opening almost feels comforting. Warm lighting, a quiet family moment, normal conversation. Everything looks safe. Everything feels familiar. Then, almost imperceptibly, the atmosphere begins to change. The mother's expressions become harder to read. Her body language feels wrong. Not dramatically, just enough. Just enough to make you question what you're watching. And once that seed has been planted, the trailer never lets it go. That's clever. Because fear doesn't begin with certainty. Fear begins with suspicion. The moment your brain starts asking questions, the horror has already begun. And that's exactly what this trailer achieves. One thing I absolutely loved about this trailer, it understands that horror isn't always about what you see. Sometimes, it's about what you think you saw. There's barely a moment here that relies on a loud noise or a cheap scare. Instead, the trailer slowly tightens its grip on you. Every glance, every pause, every strange expression, every awkward silence. It's almost daring you to notice that something isn't quite right. That's a completely different approach to modern horror. Too many horror films today feel like they're trying to win a competition for who can make the audience jump the highest. Other Mommy doesn't seem interested in that. It's trying to make you uncomfortable. And personally, I think that's much harder to pull off. Let's talk about the title for a second. Other Mommy. On paper, it almost sounds harmless, until you actually think about what those 2 words mean. This isn't some ancient demon. It isn't a masked killer. It isn't a creature lurking under the bed. It's Mom. Except, she isn't. That's horrifying because it attacks one of our most basic human instincts. As children, our parents are our first source of safety. They're the people we instinctively run towards when we're frightened. This film asks a terrifying question. What happens when the safest person in your life becomes the person you're most afraid of? That's psychological horror. And it works because everyone understands that relationship. You don't need pages of backstory. You don't need complicated mythology. The premise does all the heavy lifting. That's the sign of a brilliant concept. Something else really stood out to me: the cinematography. Watch how often the camera lingers. It doesn't rush. It doesn't constantly cut away. It almost forces you to stare into the frame, looking for something that shouldn't be there. That immediately reminded me of films that trust their audience. The camera isn't screaming, "Here's the scary bit!" It's quietly whispering, "Look closer." Those are the moments I love, because your imagination immediately starts filling in the blanks. Is someone standing in the background? Did she just smile differently? Was that movement intentional? By the time you've asked yourself those questions, the trailer has already done its job. You're unsettled. Not because you've seen something horrifying, but because your brain won't stop looking. One thing I've realized recently, I've been talking about horror films more than ever before on this channel recently. Weapons, Backrooms, Backrooms 2 Clayface, Resident Evil, now, Other Mommy. And that's not by accident. It genuinely feels like Hollywood is beginning to understand something. Audiences don't just want bigger movies anymore, they want better ideas. For years, studios kept throwing money at horror, bigger creatures, more visual effects, louder scares. But somewhere along the way, many films forgot the most important ingredient: originality. Now, we're seeing something different. Studios are taking chances again. They're backing filmmakers with distinctive voices. They're investing in unusual concepts instead of endlessly recycling the same formula. And honestly, it's about goddamn time. Because horror has always been at its best when it experiments, when it surprises us, when it makes us uncomfortable in ways we've never experienced before. Judging by this trailer, Other Mommy feels like another step in that direction. As excited as I am, I do have one concern. And it's actually the same concern I have with every great horror trailer. Please, don't peak too early. We've all seen it before. An incredible trailer, a brilliant premise, a fascinating first act. Then somewhere in the final third, the mystery disappears. The monster gets over-explained. Everything becomes bigger, louder, and less interesting. I really hope that doesn't happen here, because the mystery is the movie's greatest strength. Sometimes, the less we understand, the scarier something becomes. I don't need 20 minutes explaining exactly where Other Mommy came from. I don't need endless exposition. I want uncertainty. I want that feeling of constantly questioning what's real. If Rob Savage resists the temptation to explain everything, I think this film could become something genuinely memorable. When I look at everything surrounding this project, Jessica Chastain, Rob Savage, James Wan producing, Blumhouse, Atomic Monster, Universal. Then I look at the trailer itself. Everything points in the same direction. Nobody involved seems interested in making another disposable horror movie. Everyone appears focused on telling a genuinely unsettling story. That's encouraging, because horror deserves that level of care. It's often dismissed as the easiest genre to make. I completely disagree. Great horror might actually be one of the hardest genres to get right. You have to scare people, entertain them, keep them emotionally invested, and leave them thinking after the credits roll. That's a difficult balancing act, but if this trailer is any indication, Other Mommy understands exactly what kind of horror it wants to be. When I first clicked on this trailer, I expected a creepy supernatural movie, nothing more. Instead, I found one of the most intriguing horror concepts I've seen in quite some time. It doesn't rely on spectacle, it relies on psychology. It doesn't appear interested in making us jump every 5 minutes. It wants to make us question what we're seeing. That's a much more powerful kind of horror. Could the finished film still disappoint? Absolutely. A great trailer doesn't automatically guarantee a great movie. But based on what we've seen so far, I'm optimistic. Very optimistic. Because the foundations are all there. A brilliant premise, a talented cast led by Jessica Chastain, a director who's quietly building one of the most exciting careers in modern horror, and producers who understand exactly how to make audiences squirm in their seats. If all those pieces come together, I honestly believe Other Mommy could become one of the biggest horror surprises of 2026. Not because it's trying to reinvent horror, but because it's reminding us what great horror has always been about. The fear that the things we love most can suddenly become the things we fear most. And if that isn't unsettling, I don't know what is. So, what did you think of the Other Mommy trailer? Did it creep you out as much as it did me? Do you think Rob Savage is becoming one of Hollywood's most exciting horror directors? And could Other Mommy end up being one of the biggest horror films of 2026? I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts, so let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe to Screen Hollywood, and turn on notifications for more movie reviews, trailer breakdowns, entertainment news, and opinion-led analysis that goes beyond the headlines. And bookmark and subscribe to our international news site at screenhollywood.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.